Hey cats, it's Ed Midsole here. It's been a minute since I reviewed a shoe from those rebel rousers over at Reebok, but they're back, and this time with some wild tech in the form of the Reebok Floatzig 1. But is it worth the extra bread over the gold standard Floatride Energy Speed Loafer? Let's take a goosey gander. Welcome friends of the footwear variety. I am Sir Ed Midsole, knight of the tarmac table, you could say. Hit the ye olde subscribe button if you would. It's free of charge, don't you know? And be sure to buffet the like button. Grab your ink and quill for a comment below as well. Dankeschön. A shoe that Reebok have sent me over for review to have a little taste, like a hors d'oeuvre or something. I've got 318 grams here for a UK size 10.5, so that's a US 11.5, 11.3 ounces. I have gone down a half size this time. Found Reebok shoes a touch long in the last few iterations, and this one feels about right really for me in terms of the style and the profile, so you might want to experiment going down a half size perhaps. So weight on this one, making the Floatzig one a little bit heavier than the Reebok Floatride Energy 5. Measured the foam on this one, I'm getting about a short A durometer score of 28. That is bang on average across all the foams I've tried in all the shoes in the whole of time. It's certainly softer out the box than something like Light Strike 2.0 or React. I got about 38mm of heel stack here and about 32 in the forefoot. So it makes for a 6mm drop, and that's good because that's exactly what it says on the insole. Quite a wide shoe. We got quite a bit of surface area here, 11.8 centimeters in the forefoot and about 10.5 centimeters in the heel. So it's a little bit more like a Nike Infinity Run rather than something like a Adios 8 or even like the Energy 5. So a lot more surface area. We always start with the upper, and that's what we're going to do this time. So this shoe, I have to say, does taper in on that medial and lateral side. It's got a pointed shoe, so if you like a little bit more toe box room, it's probably not the one for you. I mean, there's reasonable toe box height here, but it is very much like a European fit. In all but the tongue, it's actually quite a low profile fit in terms of the upper. The tongue is really long. I'm not entirely sure why they've made it this long. It does remind me in many ways of the Nike Pegasus 35 that released some years back. That one had quite a considerable heel flare and a very long tongue, and that's exactly what we've got here in the Floatzig 1. I do like the low profile around the ankle though. It's certainly facilitating some good foot flexibility. Reebok have deployed a thinner mesh on this shoe, though sadly they've put loads of plasticky overlays at the top of that. The mesh is actually quite like something you'd find in like the original Vaporfly Next Percent. Though we got overlays here on the lateral side, loads on the medial side here too, and there's even some reinforcement around the front of the toe box. So it does make, sadly, for not one of the best shoes in terms of breathability. If you're running in a very warm climate, you might want to consider that. There are some softer fabrics used in the heel, almost like a cloth or something. It's very, very fine, very soft. So it just feels like a slightly strange choice in terms of the materials. There's some very breathable bits and some stuff that's not quite so much. Actually, in terms of the upper, it's kind of a middle ground between the Energy 5 and the Symmetros from Reebok. Kind of position this one somewhere in the middle. Just wish they could have reduced down some of these overlays and reduced the weight of the shoe somewhat. If you can get a shoe like this under 300 grams, it's a bit of a deal breaker. The tongue does a reasonable job of protecting the foot from any lace pressure here. Laces are okay, they're not too overly stretchy, not too rigid and firm. I've tended to use a runner's knot with this one just so I can get a really good lockdown on the top of the foot. I've experienced no heel slip or discomfort in using the shoe. Just wish they could have trimmed down some of the upper here, removed some of the unwanted elements, left it a little bit more simple perhaps, and that would have reduced the weight and made the upper a little bit more flexible and conforming. Serviceable and comfortable, though it doesn't really feel like a shoe that's up for some sort of very high pace training. Very much a daily sort of trainer. Kind of like an alternative, I suppose, to the Energy 5, though that one feels a little bit more refined and minimal. I'm going to give this a 2.5 out of 3 for the upper so far, mainly due to the fact we're hitting summer and it's pretty warm out there and this isn't the most breathable of shoes. Midsole. midsole now. So the midsole is the real talking point of this shoe. I mean, it is really odd. Getting it on foot though, it does feel a little bit like one of those On shoes where they've got sections that kind of compress a bit more. Really does create quite a smooth foot strike. The spaces here allow that foam to compress in a slightly different way, and it does feel quite a propulsive shoe in fairness, though very much a more impact protection type model rather than something that you're going to put on to do your high speed tempo work. I found the Floatzig one performs just fine for sort of daily running activities, perhaps the increase in terms of the underfoot surface area improving the stability somewhat too. I mean, when you're adding these spaces and cutouts, you've got to ensure that the shoe is still stable. I haven't ever really felt that it's unstable whatsoever. Even if you're landing in the heel, I still feel that the midsole gives you a nice kind of wide area to land in. Doesn't feel as if the ankle is kind of wobbling or popping out the shoe, especially when you consider that it's quite a low profile upper. I found this one absolutely fantastic for treadmill runs. In fact, a very smooth and forgiving ride from the Float Ride foam. I guess if you're running on roads with some strange camber, perhaps you might feel it to be a little bit inconsistent, but you know, what shoe doesn't feel like that? I mean, over here in the UK, they always seem to have significant camber to the road, so you end up with loads of stones, grit and debris in the very edges. On races, you'll always find me smack bang in the middle if I can make it. I can't ever say I found Float Ride foam to be especially firm. Some people say that they found this stuff really firm and kind of dense, but not me. I've always enjoyed the cushion in the Float Ride Energy series, for example. As such, the design here is intriguing, I suppose. Makes for a different option, perhaps if the Energy 5 is just a little bit too lacking in cushion, and perhaps lacking in terms of that wide surface area in the heel. As you can see here with the Energy 5 and the Floatzig 1, a lot more width back in the heel in the Floatzig, very much making the Floatzig a more max cushion type model, though do be aware that the midsole foam does cup up and around the heel quite considerably in the Floatzig. So really the Energy 5 is like the Pegasus of Reebok's running lineup, and this is more like the Infinity Run or something. Different implementation of the foam, but with more of a focus in terms of impact protection. I'd say the midsole foam here is a bit more forgiving than On's Cloud Tech, certainly more cushioned out the box than Light Strike as well, though I still feel the air units that you get in something like the Pegasus just give that a little bit more response and perhaps longevity if you're thinking about doing some longer runs. You tend to find that those Nike shoes with air don't bottom out quite as much as a strictly foam shoe. I think I still prefer the Forever Run Nitro from Puma over this one if I had to have one pair, and we've got a similar stack in the Velocity Nitro 3 from Puma, and a slightly better performance there. It just feels like a slightly more well-rounded shoe. Also, I guess it's more conventional. So a little bit too much compression here for anything resembling tempo work. Most of the runs I've done in this one have been sort of easy recoveries or just some steady pace. I think the Symmetros probably is still top dog for me in terms of longer run efforts from Reebok. Funnily enough, there is a Floatzig Symmetros now with a stabilizing section 2 in the heel and a different upper and lacing system. Very much a Symmetros upper grafted onto the Floatzig midsole. I'm going to give this a 2.6 out of 3 for the midsole. In terms of the outsole, it's pretty hard to actually fault the traction that you get in terms of Reebok shoes. It's got a number of durable rubber lugs here. They get wider and longer as they stretch back into the heel, although I would suggest you shouldn't try using this shoe on anything resembling a trail. Very much a road shoe for me, or as I mentioned earlier, a really killer treadmill shoe. The holes here are no doubt going to suck up some grit and debris over time. You're going to need some sort of pipe cleaner or something to clean them out. Maybe you could use a hoover. The ridges though do make the rubber a little bit more flexible here, allows for a little bit more bend, I suppose. Sometimes shoes can be quite rigid underfoot, especially in the outsole, but with those little cutouts here, it does facilitate a little bit more flex. Reebok rubber tends to hold up pretty well over time. I've seen some viewers get like 500-600 miles into their pairs of Reebok. Some really nice texture to these lugs as well, and I find that it stays there over sort of 100 or 200 miles. They don't sort of wear down too quickly. We do have a cutout back here in the heel, provides that sort of trampoline style effect. I've heard that a number of times really, and I've said it myself, but it really does facilitate a bit of bounce back here. There's a little bit more freedom in the heel to sort of compress and move. We've seen that implemented over a number of shoes over the past few years, and it really does work, especially in something like the Nova Blast, for instance. So main worry for me in the outsole is the collection of debris. Just stick to the roads and treadmill on the Floatzig one. Reasonably good outsole for a daily type model. 2.6 out of 3 so far. Talking value now, so these retail for £120 here in the UK. Do they though deliver a better value experience than something like the Energy 5? Well, we've certainly got more stack here, more cushion. Is not so much of a high drop here, it's only 6mm, but I think for me the cheaper Energy 5 is still the best option for daily shoe. It is that bit lighter, there's a more conventional build, and I think you could always go for the Summitros if you wanted to go a little bit further with a bit more cushion. Yeah, it's a small price bump up from the Energy 5, quite a bit more compression here to the midsole. I guess it's horses for courses really. If you want something that's sort of light, nimble, lower profile, then go for the Energy 5. If you want something a bit more monstrously stacked, then this is the way to go. Quality wise, I've noticed there's significant sort of glue seepage here. I guess I'm having to use a lot of glue to actually affix the upper down to the midsole. Perhaps you've not got quite as many contact points. Take that into consideration before you pick up a pair. There are other shoes out there with a more conventional feel and more stack. I've gone through some of those in my recent best daily shoes video. Do check that one out. I'll leave a link at the end of the video. It's pretty well put together though for a shoe of that price. I'm going to give it a 2.6 out of 3 for value so far. I think you'll get some pretty decent mileage out of this one. I don't see it falling apart or anything. It's just a different take on that float ride foam. If I've totaled the scores up correctly, that gives us 10.3 out of 12 after my initial runs for the Reebok Floatzig 1. Have you picked up a pair of these recently, people? Are you a big fan of Reebok's running shoe lineup? Let me know your thoughts and opinions on these down in the comments. Musical interlude time. I'm a big fan of the artist Scott Walker. I love his third album, Scott 3, released in 1969. It's a beautiful song I was playing to my son the other day, which is called Butterfly. Each one of the songs on his albums almost are like pictures hung in a gallery. You wander in and you can sort of look at the pictures, cast your eyes over them, and you take in this little scene. It could be a small picture. This one to me feels a little bit like a hazy afternoon on a sunny summer Sunday. Perhaps you're just laying there in the corn or something and you just see all the butterflies flying around. It's beautiful in terms of the way that the instrumentation really recreates this sort of vision or a sound in your head. You can almost see the picture in front of you. It's quite beautiful. A lot of people know Scott Walker for his material with the Walker Brothers. Yeah, they had some big hits and stuff, but his solo material is just out of this world. Peerless almost, really. Vocal delivery always fantastic, and wholesome, rich sound to his voice, and the material, the lyrics are just unhinged at times. They're really, really odd, really interesting. So much better than some of the tap that you get in the pop charts these days. Scott Walker, absolute legend. Go and check this one out. Scott 3, the track's called Butterfly. Thanks for tuning in, people. Hope you enjoyed the Floatzig 1 review. Hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up like too. Also help us out with the algorithm with a comment. My name's Eddbud and I'll be seeing you